We are looking forward to this timely and important conversation with leaders who will share their insights on how we arrived at this critical inflection point, the urgent need to revitalize the maritime industrial base and its workforce, and what must be done to preserve the strength and resilience of the United States as a maritime nation. Over to you, Admiral Klunder. Thank you.
A lot of great familiar faces here. Thank you, Adam. L3 Harris is certainly always has felt honored to be a strong supporter of the U.S. Naval Institute and a key partner within our critical maritime industrial base. This topic is tremendously important, and I am honored to introduce the moderator of this panel, the Honorable Sean Stackley. He's the former Acting Secretary of the Navy and former Senior Vice President of Strategy, Growth, and Technology at L3 Harris Technologies, where he oversaw growth strategies intended to synchronize the company's technology investments with the pursuit, planning, mergers, and acquisition efforts. Before stepping in as the Acting Secretary of the Navy, he served as the Assistant Secretary of Research, Development, and Acquisition for more than 8 years. Oh, by the way, if you didn't realize it, Sean was my boss both in uniform and in my suit. His 4-decade career also includes time as a professional staff member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, where he reviewed Navy and Marine Corps programs. As a Navy Surface Warfare Officer, I know he wants me to speed this up. Mr. Stackley served aboard the USS John Young, DD-973, as the program manager for LPD-17, the production officer for USS Arleigh Burke, DDG-51, and the project naval architect for the Canadian frigate HMCS Halifax. Oh yes, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight that Sean is a huge Naval Academy and Boston Red Sox fan. So over to you if you want to ask him any baseball questions as well. By the way, I think they're in second place right now behind the dreaded Yankees. It's okay.
We all have our crosses to bear. Thank you, Matt.
Congrats, Sean.
All right. Well, thank you. Hey, I've been looking forward to this. This is a great panel, an incredibly important topic. And I'm going to do quick introductions. And this panel needs no introduction. You know, to my left here, Admiral John Richardson, 31st CNO of the Navy. Prior to that, Stockdale Award winner on the Honolulu, ComSub 4, naval reactors, and a tremendous shipmate partner. We worked across the hall from each other, and today advisor and many boards with industry and supporting the government. Vice Admiral Jim Downey, NAVSEA, a surface warfare engineering duty officer, started his career in information warfare, information systems, quickly grew into program management, CVNX, CGX, DDG 1000 program manager, PEO carriers. He was also Naval Regional Maintenance Center, and today he owns all the functions coast to coast and international for the Navy Naval Sea Systems Command. And one of his predecessors, NAVSEA, Vice Admiral retired Tom Moore. Tom, nuclear surface warfare, spent about a third of his career at sea on nukes, and then shifted over to engineering duty and waterfront at Newport News, the ins and outs of carriers and submarines, and then rapidly moved into carrier program management, where we first met when you were delivering the George H.W. Bush, and then on to be the ship maintenance N-43B as a sponsor, and then back in the Navy Yard as PEO carriers, then ultimately NAVSEA, and today he's government relations at HII. And Mr. Marty Bollinger, who spent 30 years as an A&D consultant in Booz Allen Hamilton, working a lot of the issues that we've been working with side by side, government and industry, and also a senior executive lecturer at Darden, lecturing, basically training and educating a lot of our flags and senior executives that are running the Navy today. And a noted author of several books published by the Naval Institute, and countless articles on the matter. In fact, he's written a very important article in this past proceedings on shipbuilding. So if you all please take a seat and let's enjoy the next hour together here. I thought I'm going to kick this off a little bit with some important history that we'll just say it sets the stage here. So 20 years ago, after a hiatus in submarine construction, Newport News was in the throes of overcoming challenges delivering its first of class Virginia submarine, the USS Texas. And at the other end of the shipyard at that time, with the Nimitz-class carrier procurement having been stretched to 5-year centers, the last of the class, George H.W. Bush, was getting ready to launch, dealing with a lot of challenges associated with green labor that had basically grown in the shipyard as a result of stretching the carrier schedules. Meanwhile, in the fabrication buildings, after a gap in carrier procurement due to requirements churn and really a battle over transformation in the Pentagon, the new first-of-class aircraft carrier, Gerald R. Ford, had just started construction. So it was at that time, 20 years ago, when the Navy was at its smallest size since World War I, that the Department of Defense submitted a budget request with just 4 ships included. The Congressional Research Service branded the budget request as a shipwreck. Meanwhile, Congress, failing to pass an appropriation, was informed by the Navy that absent an anomaly to allow the Carl Vinson to start its refueling complex overhaul, the Newport News would have to lay off thousands of skilled workers, the ship's schedule would slip more than day for day, and the RCOH cost would increase prohibitively. So these events are crystal clear in my mind because I had just gone to work for Senator John Warner, and he was then chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who would use the weight of his position to first and foremost get that anomaly passed. That was now. And while he went about increasing the Navy's shipbuilding budget that year, and he passed legislation that required the Navy to maintain a 12-carrier battle force, and he would then authorize 3 carriers to be procured on 4-year centers. It was all in keeping with Congress's responsibility to provide and maintain a Navy. And he wrapped it up and believed that we're in good water now. Well, a couple weeks later, the 2007 budget request was submitted to the Hill, and the battle began anew. And Proceedings magazine sounded the alarm with an article titled, "American Shipbuilding, an Industry in Crisis." Now, in the article, a young president of Newport News Shipbuilding, Mike Petters, elegantly described the commitment required by both government and industry in order to maintain a vibrant, healthy shipbuilding industry and to ensure our Navy didn't suffer the fate of our closest allies who had taken a pause in shipbuilding in years past. Now, from my perspective, having spent my career in uniform in shipbuilding and my time on the Hill with the Sea Power Subcommittee, Mike nailed it. Mike nailed it. Now, we didn't know each other well at that point in time, but I took that article, put it in my playbook for the rest of my time on the Hill, and more importantly, from my time at RDA. From industry, a solid design, a viable, resilient supply chain, a skilled workforce, and the willingness and ability to invest in a healthy infrastructure. From the government, stability, all caps, stability, stable requirements, a stable budget, a reliable shipbuilding plan, continuous production, and adequate incentives to attract capital investment. And from both, discipline, particularly as it relates to contract changes, cost and schedule realism, and partnership. And Mike, he was the epitome, the model of partnership between government and industry. Too often, he wrote, it seems that the question being answered today is, what can we afford? Not, what do we need to ensure a Navy's security and freedom of the seas? And too seldom is the question asked, how do we ensure that American shipbuilding will be sound 20 years from now? Well, here we are at the proverbial 20 years from now, and the alarm has sounded once again. Shipbuilding has been declared a national priority, which for a maritime nation, that goes without saying. Now, we didn't arrive at this position quickly. We're not going to emerge quickly, but borrowing from Winston Churchill, to never let a good crisis go to waste, at this point in time, with the resources and priority and the weight of the offices of the White House, the Pentagon, the Hill, and the executive offices in industry, we have to leverage the opportunity, capture the lessons, identify the needed changes, untap the innovation, and pound away ceaselessly until this Navy ship is righted. Now, what do we need to pound away on? So to be clear, shipbuilding is the means to an end, where national security is the end itself. So I'm going to start with Admiral Richardson, and with a clear eye on the rise of China's Navy. I would like you to set the stage for the discussion by tackling that most fundamental question that's been passed from CNO to CNO since Ernest King. What size Navy does the nation need? And to be clear, which you know best, this is not a matter of a ship count. So I'd like you to elevate the discussion in terms of the naval power that the nation needs, and it gives you a sense of strengths and weaknesses and gaps that you see and the urgency and priority that you place on closing those gaps.
Yeah. Well, first, Sean, how do you expect me to follow that opening salvo you just gave? I mean, that was just like mic drop right there. And so, but I'll do my very best. And even before I get going on that, I just want to give the moderator and, in fact, the entire audience your last chance to substitute Lieutenant Kim for me, right? Because I think he could probably articulate shipbuilding as good as anybody in this room. I thought that was a terrific talk you gave, so I look forward to your article. And then I'd like to riff off of Professor Lambert's talk a little bit to answer your question, because we sort of confronted this, you know, when we were working together in the Pentagon, and we commissioned sort of a meta study, if you will, where we asked just about everybody who we thought had credibility in terms of exploring the question, exactly as you posed it. What is the Navy that the nation needs, right? The Navy to meet the responsibilities that are required by the United States as a maritime nation. And we could go on for the entire hour about what that means, but we farmed that question out to a number of think tanks, to individual navalists. We took, you know, the OpNav staff took a stab at that. And, you know, there was an initial drive to sort of like, you know, the team came up to me and said, hey, we got to make sure we've got agents in every one of these places so that we get the answer we want. I said, no, I really want to see what the answers are. And everybody, you know, as you can imagine, had a little bit of a different take on it. But the idea came back of this concept of naval power, and it did kind of converge on a number of ships, right? I mean, this size of the Navy, the ship count is, you know, you can't live with it and you can't live without it, right? Because a number of the efforts sort of start with that. But we did start to express this idea. The number at that time came back, and we sort of averaged, if you will, all of the responses. We came up with that number, 355 ships at the time. And, you know, of course, there's a lot of information and details in the composition of that force. But, you know, and that number sort of was compelling enough that it became law. And so off we were. But as you said, you know, what sort of things went into that? And as Professor Lambert said, it's much more than just the warfighting element of it, right? And in fact, we want to be deterring warfighting. We want to be out there to do that sufficiently so that we never really have to get into a fight, so that every time Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin or whoever wants to take us on looks out over the South China Sea or wherever, they say, you know, it's not going to happen today because it won't turn out well for us. So that's just sort of the warfighting dimension. But there is, as he intimated, there's also sort of an economic dimension. And this goes back to sort of the fundamental ideas of Mahan, which is, you know, about the time that he was writing and struggling to win the Naval Institute essay contest. That was about the time that the United States was moving beyond its shores, right? We had sort of achieved our limits of prosperity and influence, and now we had to go overseas, right? We had to become a global nation and get access to global markets, and therefore that required a global Navy that could secure all of those trade routes and access to those markets, and that required global thinking and global strategy. So around this time, you know, the Naval War College got stood up. Around this time, the Naval Postgraduate School got stood up to address these challenges. So it's multidimensional, as he said. It's warfighting, it's economic, it's diplomatic. That's why sometimes, I got to confess, I sort of cringe a little bit when we reduce calling sailors warfighters, right? Because I think that to call one of our people, a U.S. Navy sailor, it absolutely includes being a premier maritime warfighter, the premier maritime warfighter in the world, but so much more, right? You are an ambassador, you are to a degree an economist. So at the time, 355 ships was the number that was put forward, and that allowed us to at least to focus our thinking. But again, that's just the start of it, right? So, what about the crews that are going to operate those 355 ships? What about the shipbuilding capacity that's going to be required to build the 355 ships? The pier space, right? The operational concepts, the systems that we're going to need to put on those ships to make them combat effective. Now you would talk about the software and the coding that would be downloaded onto those ships to increase the Navy's power to execute all of those missions even while deployed, and we can talk a little bit about that maybe later on. But the shipbuilding part is just the start of it, and as we said, it's kind of the easier part. It's the rest of it that has to come to be accounted for as well. And so now I think because of the world situation, the number would be greater than 355. I think that the delivering naval power, combat power, economic power, diplomatic power, all of those things is going to count on systems that can deliver systems and software in addition to hulls. And then, of course, there's the people. But I've got to say, though, that, and then I'll close. It's all sort of a little bit of a discussion about almost like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, right? Because while we were having this discussion of 355, there's sort of this temptation to get into an academic discussion. Well, is it 355 or 357, or is it 360, or whatever it might be? And the answer, I was happy to let that discussion go on. But in the meantime, we were at like 275 ships at the time. So let's start building, right? Okay, I got it. We might be off by 10. We may be even by off, But let's start building, because we're way shy of where we need to be. And I think that kind of question leads us to this emphasis on shipbuilding right now, a fundamental part of being a maritime nation.
Yeah, it was Admiral Mullen walked over that four-ship budget caused Admiral Mullen to have to come over and explain what's going on with Navy shipbuilding. Yeah. And he created the 308 ship plan, which became the 313 ship plan, which became the 355 ship plan, which today is 381 ships. But in all cases, when you're at 295 today, the vector is pointing in the same direction. We need a larger Navy to provide for security. Now I'm going to shift over a little bit here to some history. That going from the 600-ship Navy to the 295 today, there were a lot of changes that occurred. Some of them reversible, some of those irreversible. So Tom, your article in the February proceedings touched on a little bit of that history. Go ahead and plumb a little bit deeper into just the past 30 years, into the key turning points, and then maybe touch on which of those are reversible.
Sure.
Versus, hey, we have to keep going the direction we're going.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. I think you did actually a pretty good job of summarizing up front a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about now, and I'm going to kind of dive into a little bit more detail. And I spent probably the last 25 years of my career doing shipbuilding, and the question I would get all the time is, hey, how come you can't build more ships? Why are we stuck below 300? And with all due respect to the lieutenant there, a lot of the people tell me today, well, you don't have enough shipyards. That's the problem. We need more shipyards because we don't have the capacity. And I think you have to go back and look at where we came from to understand what the problem is today. And so if you go back into the end of the Reagan buildup between 1981 and in the mid-90s, we built 5 aircraft carriers in 17 years. That's from laying the keel on CVN 71 to delivery of 75, Terry S. Truman. We'll build 4 carriers in the next 28 years. During that same time period, Electric Boat delivered 18 Ohio-class submarines in 18 years, 1 per year. And then we're going to go 33 years between building our next ballistic missile submarine. Electric Boat and Newport News together built 59 Los Angeles submarines in 14 years, 4.2 per year, and we're struggling now to get anywhere near 2 per year. And then we built 61 DDG-51s in about a 12-year period between Bath and Ingalls, each yard delivering about 2.5 per year. And then over the next 10 years, we ordered 11 ships. So when we talk about capacity, I think what you saw is that the shipyards had the physical capacity exist to build the force that we need. So and in fact, in many cases, the shipyards today are more modern than they were back in the 80s. What's changed is the workforce, and that was brought on by decisions that were made by the government. Between 1993 and 2010, we averaged ordering 5.5 ships per year. And between 1993 and 2027, I picked that length of time because that's the life cycle of a DDG-51, we'll have ordered 269 ships. So when people say to me, well, why can't you get to 313? I say, well, we only ordered 269 ships, so do the math, you're not gonna get there. So what happened between 1993 and 2010 is industry behaved rationally. They started downsizing because the demand was not there. And the interesting thing about it is if you go look at it in a little bit more detail, it's up until about 2010, the productivity levels of the shipyards was better than it had ever been. And people would say, well, how is that possible? Because you were downsizing. And it's interesting how the shipyards work. They work on a last in, first out basis. So most of the layoffs occurred with the junior folks in the shipyard. So for a period of time, the experience level of the shipyards started to become better. And so they became more productive. And then around 2010, 2012, I've studied this. I've tried to figure out exactly kind of where that inflection point was. You started to see retirement of some of the older shipyard workers. And that happened just about the time that we realized, hey, we need to ramp up to 2 Virginia class per year. We need to start building more DDGs. And so the problem was the workforce did not exist in order to do that. And so while the physical capacity exists in the shipyards today, we don't have the manpower that we need. And that has been proven to be exceedingly challenging to get the workforce that we need. I like the Buc-ee's comment there. By the way, I'm a huge Buc-ee's fan, so if you haven't been to a Buc-ee's, you got to check it out. But that is part of the problem. The welders, get paid only about $2 more. There's an interesting statistic. In 1993, the average electrician supervisor at Newport News and Ingalls had been in that shipyard for 23 years. Today, the average supervisor in the shipyards has been their electrical supervisor, has been about 4.5 years. So not only do you not have, not only do you have a green workforce, you have a green supervision. And so that's been a real problem. Now, this is a national issue. This is not just a shipbuilding issue. Shipbuilding is kind of a microcosm of where the country is. I think, over the last 20, 25 years, we took our eye off the ball and blue collar manufacturing became less in vogue. Everybody had to get a college degree. And, Spanish medieval literature is I don't know what you do with that, but we took people away from those core things. And you can go look at Boeing, you can go look at Intel, you can go look at General Electric. This is a nationwide issue that we've got to solve. And it's not going to be, we're not going to fix it overnight. Now, I think in the last couple of years, you've seen industry and the government together start to address that. Some of the maritime and industrial base funding that's going out there, a lot of the work training programs, we've involved governors, et cetera. And you're starting to see the number of workers come up. But it's still a very green labor workforce. And the last piece of this that we're going to have to go solve is the wage piece, because the attrition levels that we're seeing in the shipyards today, you can get them in the door, but we're having trouble keeping them. The attrition rate is 20% or more. In fact, up at Fincantieri, where we're trying to build a frigate, it's astronomically high. And so we've got to go solve that. So we've got to train them and we've got to pay them. And it's going to take 5 to 7 years before we get there. So the things that you mentioned, a constant steady demand signal, which I think we've seen over the last 5 to 7 years, has allowed industry to start making the investments and also start hiring the workforce that's going to be there to get where we need to be. But the history behind this has really caused the challenges that we have today. I think most of those are solvable. Certainly the workforce issue is solvable. We're going to have to be willing to pay them more to keep them. We're going to have to be willing to train them more. And the cost of building ships today, those ships are a lot more complex than they were built. I tell people, you could buy a Honda Accord back in 1972, and you can buy a Honda Accord today. They're not the same ship. So an aircraft carrier today is significantly different than the Nimitz that we built in 1975. And people will say to me, well, you paid $750 million for Nimitz, and you paid $13 billion for Ford. Why is that? Well, if you took everything that we've done to modernize Nimitz since 1975, and by the way, we keep them for 50 years, and she's still out there doing great things.
Tom, I don't want to cut you off, but
Yeah.
right now I'm reliving the aircraft carrier hearing with you and Senator McCain, and I'd rather not go there.
Okay, but, so I'll stop there. I think I've probably at least laid enough of the groundwork for the other people to talk about, but that's really kind of the reason we are where we are today is because some of the decisions that we made over probably about a 20-year period, starting in the mid-90s.
I had a flashback to when you and I greeted President Trump on the Gerald R. Ford
I was there.
to commission it.
Let's go back to steam. But okay, so we're basically we've defined the problem, and I'm going to turn now to an individual that sits atop the organization that's responsible for fixing the problem. Vice Admiral Downey, NAVSEA, you and your PEO partners. You guys, you've got your arms around the issue. This is a tiger by the tail. Tom just discussed some of the initiatives in terms of workforce, et cetera. I want you to dive deeper into the health of the workforce, the infrastructure, the supply chain, and what you and the PEOs are doing with the whole of government approach here to solve those issues. And then how long is it going to take?
My remarks or to fix shipbuilding?
You got 5 minutes.
Okay. So 2 quick comments first. To the uniformed awardees, award winners, USNI forgot one part of your award. You all get a new set of orders. So we're meeting in the back at the end of this. Is that good? Yeah? I don't really care how you vote, but anyway. And then really glad to see Mr. Bollinger with us because everybody else here is a former boss of mine. And I know I'm going to get a critique from each of them tonight, but I'm really interested in yours. So, well, a little bit on where we hit somewhat on where we are. I'll just want to briefly summarize that, and then we'll talk about what we're doing about it. So, over the last 40 to 50 years, we've gone from 35% of the national workforce in manufacturing to just over 10. Okay, so although the nation grows, that's where we are. We've cut the public shipyards in half. We've gone from 8 public yards to 4. And being an engineering duty officer, the folks that run most of those areas, we've cut that workforce even to a higher degree. So as we get into maintenance, you would be surprised that about 20% of us actually work in maintenance. Some are in R&D, and then many are in programs. So things that we've reshaped the uniform side of this as well. We've gone from multiple nuclear yards, private, to 2, and 17,000 suppliers to about 5,000. 30 private construction yards to 7. And we've gone from building nationally about 5% of the commercial ships in the world to less than 0.25%. So that's kind of where we are. Today, in the Navy, we have 93 ships under contract for construction. 93. You got to read the fine print. That's all the option ships as well that aren't really real yet until money comes in and we exercise those options. They range to get to how long? Those ships range from about 4 to 10 years to build, kind of destroyer to carrier. So quite a long time. Many of the current ships under contract, a significant portion of them were awarded pre-COVID, when you look at that 10-year range or 5, 6, 7, 8-year range. And the supplier base, and Congress has helped us with this, supplies, the supply chain is at least 1.5 times longer to supply than it used to be. So now we have 3 years of advanced procurement instead of 2. So there's a lot going on there. What are we doing about it? Since 2018, almost $10 billion invested via the various versions of what we call the MIB today. Submarine, surface ship combatants, and a few other initiatives. Those right now are going to 33 different states in over 700 supplier projects. to improve the manufacturing processes, to reduce the time, and to create new companies to some degree or different branches, and a significant investment in additive manufacturing. So there's a lot going on there, but it takes quite a while to get there. So heavy emphasis on the supplier base, as well as the shipyards. Significant CapEx investments, billions and billions of dollars. People, over this next 8 or 9 years or so, our projections are we have to hire in the private sector 250,000 folks to do this work. 150,000 of that just for submarine construction. 250,000. Now that assumes the attrition rates that Admiral Moore was referencing, and in some places we see much higher than that. We referenced an area that's over 45% attrition for skilled labor.
Yeah, but we can't sustain that.
Right.
So we can't build a plan that assumes that we're going to be suffering 20, 30% attrition. We got to tackle that.
And in our most stable yards, our most mature yards are at or above 20%. So people, we were talking about wages a little bit before. So quick C story. ROTC Notre Dame, big Irish Catholic family, turned it down. My father was extremely happy with me. New York police officer, so I'll leave it at that. Got me a job with the Teamsters Union in 1982, one of 8 kids to help pay for college, $15 an hour. 43 years ago. We used to be at, for these jobs, 4 to 5 times minimum wage, and today we're at 1.3. If we just take that labor on say a $4 billion ship, that entry-level labor, the lieutenant was hitting some of it, and raise that labor 25%, a $4 billion ship is $4,040 million. 1% increase. We have to, and we've just had a significant coordination with some of the submarine suppliers to do just that. In reality, the corporate focus, the investments drives the companies to focus on different things. So of course they want to deliver for us, but the incentive has not been to pay their people more money. Most of them, the more experienced yards have really good training and educational investments, but we can't keep the people past the first year. So yes, we are bringing in people, $18 to $22 for entry to join the company, and 0 days off in the first year. We have to turn all of that around. That's really our biggest area, because when you break down a ship, and you can get into direct and in other areas, more than 60% of all the money, when you actually look at the material areas as well, over 60% of the entire cost of the ship is actually labor. It's not the high-end radar and this and that, it is, but they're a much lower percent. So we are very focused on that. We're very focused on stabilization of the programs, block buys wherever possible. I will say across the administration, I regularly hear from seniors, get to what do you really think this ship is going to cost? And we have atrophied that capability. So we are really spending a lot of time on the government side on turning around design, cost engineering, and candidly program management to improve those areas. So investing in the infrastructure of the yard, the wages for those employees, huge investment in the supplier base, and those are really the areas we're focused on, Mrs. Secretary.
All right, so now this is one of my favorite Donald Rumsfeld quotes, which I fell back on quite often. If you can't solve the problem, enlarge the problem. So we're going to enlarge the problem here, and I'm going to turn to Marty. You know, in the face of these challenges, one of the true bright spots is that there's greater alignment today in terms of the Navy, DoD, the administration, and industry than there's been since the 600 ship Navy. So with that whole of government mindset, what changes to policy and practice would you propose to the administration in order to clear the hurdles that stand in the way of investment in infrastructure and workforce, greater partnering with foreign shipyards, and greater support for acquisition strategies that provide the stability that industry is yearning?
Anything else? Is that enough?
You got 5 minutes.
Okay. Let me step back a little bit, because about the alignment issue, I think we all agree that unless industry is fully aligned with the government, the Navy, Congress, it's going to be tough to get stuff done. And I do think there is a fundamental problem of misalignment, not when you talk about the executives running the industry. I think they're very aligned. But they've got another countervailing force that's pulling them in a different direction, and that's the owners, the investors of the company. At the end of the day, they get to call the shots. And if they don't like what management is doing, they will replace management, or they'll bring in a Raytheon former CEO as a board member. The challenge is, think about what the owners want. It's really quite simple. They want a return on their investment, and here's the important part, that's commensurate with the risk we're asking them to undertake. We have lots of investors willing to embark on high-risk investments, Silicon Valley. Why? Because if it pays off, the payoff is huge. We have lots of people willing to take a low rate of return on their investment, government bonds. Why? Because the risk is low. I think what we have here is a mismatch between perceived return and perceived risk, and they have to become aligned. Let's think about returns in naval shipbuilding. It's tough to make a great return in naval shipbuilding. In a good year, you might make 10% margin on sales. The Navy's been very creative, things like share lines, trying to give an opportunity to boost that a little bit for superb performance. Electric Boat, Bath Iron Works, NASSCO's combined return on sales last quarter was 7%. Apple's was 32%. Microsoft was over 40%. So if I've got capital looking to where to invest that, I've got choices to make. And that's why it's tough to get a lot of the capital flowing in. Now, maybe you can have an argument that, yeah, margins are low, but I'm going to grow really, really fast. Tough to do in a budget-constrained and driven environment. With all respect to Newport News, they're not going to invent a new ship and have it in Walmart for Christmas. They're not going to start opening up markets in China. I hope not. It's a challenge to grow very quickly in defense. Now, compare that with a company like NVIDIA, which has grown 45% per year for the last 5 years. It's grown over 100% per year for the last 2 years. Guess where the money is going? So I don't think we can play the return game, which makes me think about the risk game. Investors are perfectly happy to invest in businesses, and I think employees, blue-collar workers, think very similarly, if they see the risk is acceptable given what they're going to get out of it. And I think we have a problem here, because naval shipbuilding, you can hear all the numbers we've been passing out about the shipbuilding plans, it's considered extremely, extremely risky by investors who take a long-term view. I cut my teeth working with Electric Boat, helping to take them from 5 submarines a year to 1 every other year. People see that. Employees see that. Someone shows up at Groton or Quonset Point saying, I'm going to work in submarines. The young comes out and says, well, let me tell you what they did to me back in the 1990s. So it's tough. What can we do to reduce the risk? I think there's some things we can do. The most drastic solution is the investment should be made by somebody other than the shareholders. The assets should be owned by the government. Sounds outrageous. It's exactly what a company would do. Boeing couldn't find people making the right kind of interior parts. They got into business themselves. They weren't happy with the people assembling the fuselage. They brought it back in-house. Tough to do, not our way. It is how we do nuclear weapons, by the way. Government-owned, contractor-operated facilities. Short of that, there's a possibility of a take-or-pay mentality. You want a company to invest in another dry dock? Fine, you can commit to filling it for 5 years with work. After that, who knows? Well, the government could contract so that if it's not being used, they will accept the depreciation charge. They will accept the maintenance charge to keep it intact, share the risk. But the reality is, shipbuilding is risky. We said we're going to build 28, 29 Seawolf submarines. We built 3. We said we're going to build 32 DDG-1000s. We built 3. 50 LCSs, 38. Now we're talking about the Constellation program, and investors are like, whoa, do I really want to commit the capital? So I think we should stop focusing so much on profit as the motivator for industry and focus more on how do we make the risk acceptable to the people we need to start pouring capital and their own labor and careers and futures into the industry.
Thank you. We're going to pause right now and shift over to audience questions and answers. And I think there are mics set up. If somebody has a question from the audience wants to step up to the mic. In the meantime, I've got some questions that have come in by text. So while I see Mo Gaudier quickly. Okay, we're going to start on my starboard.
So not so much a question as an observation. I grew up in 757. I grew up in Williamsburg. Newport News Shipbuilding was the job du jour. It was security. But I think where you hit on it, which is the wage disparity. I mean, Newport News had the perfect model. It had the apprentice school. It trained. Most folks don't know the apprentice school was a D3 college level. So it was a great in-source, but the wages were there. And what you said, where it was 4 times, and we allowed that to deteriorate because it was the job of choice for security. That went away. And why, I don't understand. Now, shipyards don't need to become Apple. Shipyards, there's lots of defense money that understands that rate of return and will fund it for forever. But it's got to be some getting out of the box where you bring that wage level back up, because I think what you're saying, what happened is someone could go to the apprentice school, work a year in the dirt and grime, being an electrician, and go, why am I doing this when I can go work for Buc-ee's, or for an electrical company that was mom and pop and not doing the grime, et cetera. So it's, again, wages has got to come up, has got to get to where that disparity is no longer there. And I'm assuming that there's enough docks that if we had, and so I guess the back end question then comes as well. One, we're not funding. How much is CR? How much is not being able to see that consistency driving?
A quick response. Yeah. So $18 to $22 an hour, roughly. We don't pay them a whole lot more to start in our naval shipyards, 22 to 26. So we don't value this in certain elements of the country, or the nation, period. That's where we've moved over the last 30 to 40 years. Last one related to it is back to what was said about how shipbuilding has changed in quantity and the cycles. When I came into the PO carrier job behind Admiral Antonio, I think is out here, and behind Admiral Moore, in 2019, in a yard with close to 30,000 people, 49% of the yard had 2 years or less experience. We changed programs. We changed the George Washington RCOH 3 times, start and stop, and we spread out carriers and a few other little tweaks on the submarine side. They all go together. So the program stability is really important.
Port side.
Yes, 2 questions, actually. One about our supply chain. Do we have a secure supply chain like in the United States, or we're reliant on other countries and possible supply chain problems? And secondly, Brett Sadler just nominated to be the new head of MARAD. How can we work with the commercial shipbuilding side to maybe increase capacity and consistency?
It's significantly domestic. There is some foreign. You might have in an aircraft carrier 30-ish other countries involved in every state in the country. There's about 5,000 subcontracts to the carrier contract to provide supplies. So is it stable? No. Hence all the activity there.
Extremely brittle, right? I mean, you really almost literally have a situation where somebody has 2 weeks of sickness, and you're going to see that translate to delays in delivery of an aircraft carrier.
Yes,
I mean, that's kind of how brittle this supply chain is.
Yeah, just a data point. So, 70% of the suppliers today in the nuclear shipbuilding world are sole source. So, to your point here.
I want to clarify. Single source.
Single source. All right, so we have a single source. For 70% of the things we buy are coming from a single source. We have one person building turbines. We have one person building reduction gears, we have one person doing castings.
Yeah.
And so if they have a hiccup or a problem, or then it causes
Yeah.
the problems cascade.
And oh, by the way, I forget the exact word. It's not monopoly, but it's single source monoscopy. Monopsony.
Yeah, monopsony.
Colonoscopy.
Don't go there. No, say it's a monopsony.
Single source and single customer, right? So
Single source, single customer.
yeah.
Hey, there's an important point there. I apologize,
Yeah.
over to you. As Admiral Moore described the Nimitz program and four-year centers, et cetera, we funded Nimitz ships over 1 to 4 years. Within 4 years, appropriated years, a carrier was bought. That was the worst situation on 2 of them, and the others were 1 to 3. Ford was funded over 17 years.
Yeah.
JFK right now is at 16 years. The 2 ship buy, 80 and 81, we agreed to 8 years, and it's at 11 years. So we dole out a 10th or a 17th. So that's another reason why it's fragile. Those that we provide the funds to don't have the decision space to buy $10 billion worth of whatever they want to buy for us. On the 2 ship buy, we're doing much better, even though it's spread out. 81 has 60% more material at this point than 80 did when she was at this point. So it costs almost $1 billion more just due to phasing over the years to incrementally fund the ship.
I had the opportunity to look at 356 of the most critical suppliers on a big Navy shipbuilding program. I'm not supposed to say which one. And I looked at the ownership structure of each one and how it's been evolving. Every year, over 10% of that group of suppliers changed ownership. And a common pattern was a family-owned business that the family had been involved for generations, loved the business, felt connection with the Navy and the product, was selling out to a sort of generic private equity firm. There's some that specialize in Navy work like Compass or J.F. Lehman, but just people that knew nothing about the Navy and all they see is dollars. I worry about that.
Yeah.
And so, when I become king in charge, I'm going to allocate a fund for Admiral Downey here to start buying out some of those suppliers to keep them focused on the work that needs to get done. I really worry about that fragility in the industrial base.
Thank you. Back to
Yes, Rick Easton. Mr. Secretary, CNO, 2 NAVSEAs and an industry icon. Great panel and some really good insight. Stepping back just a little bit from a more macro perspective, I think, at this particular point in time. Somebody on the panel mentioned that the maritime industrial base is a subset or maybe a microcosm of the national industrial base. President Trump has secured arguably more than $6 trillion of investment, and even if only a portion of that comes to play, it's got to have a major impact on the national industrial base. How do you see that affecting the maritime industrial base? What do we need to do from a legislative perspective, potentially, to make sure that we can get to where we need to even just start increasing the number of ships in the United States Navy?
Well, I'll let somebody else take that, but I'm going to first say that if I go back to that 20 years ago and that 4-ship budget, the budget for SCN, shipbuilding budget, was $7.5 billion. And if you look at what it is today, it's $36 billion. And so there's more than inflation that's involved there. So while there's more dollars that are, I'll say, coming into the public trust, I'm not sure that today the shipbuilding enterprise can spend more dollars efficiently and effectively given the resources that they have in their hand today. So step A, build a plan. Step B, budget the plan. So I'm going to go immediately to my left here.
Yeah, I mean, I would just put an exclamation point on everything you said, and what we have to, I think, start to reorient towards output metrics instead of input metrics, right? I mean, this is how a business runs, right? If you don't meet your output metrics, you get like 1.5 quarters of not doing that, and we're going to find someone who can, right? So there's real accountability, I think. The rubber meets the road in the output metrics. So we've talked, I mean, I forget the number, but we're going to hire, thousands of more shipyard workers. I can't tell you the number of times when they said, hey, this is the number. We get this number and it's cure. We're gonna, give us this amount of funding. We'll hire these amount of workers and it's done. You'll never have to hear from me again, except next year, right? So, this is I think we can get intoxicated on input metrics. there's human nature to want to find some kind of thing that you can, a stoplight you can call green, but until you focus on output metrics, it's going to be a hard time to, hard to really get that accountability.
Could not agree more.
Yeah.
Please.
Admiral Downey, some of your remarks this evening led me to think that perhaps we would have done well to hear from Charlie Nemfakos as well. It's a little bit of a
Blast from the past.
This is a question primarily for Admiral Downey, but I think anybody else could address it as well. I feel like we've heard some contradictory things across the range this evening. The encouraging public investments in the MIB notwithstanding, would you say that it's fair to describe the senior uniform leadership of the Navy today as viewing the shipbuilding crisis as a national industrial strategy problem or a procurement function?
All of the above. Yeah, that's kind of covers the gamut. I won't speak for the rest of the senior leadership of the Navy. I want to stay here for a while. As the CNO said, they want to see progress. Don't want to hear another set of numbers. Over to the question over here, there are accelerated buying approaches via the Forge Act and the Ships Act that we're working to employ. We have to get much less bureaucratic. Okay, I will tell you, I have a team going through 5,300 technical specifications to see what can we get rid of or go commercial. And they're 75% through them and with about 18 months of work. There's things there that we have to get through. On the procurement side, I will say a challenge we have with the Hill, throughout the government, is we don't really address what the cost of the ship is. We want to book ships. So we do these deals together, very aggressive negotiating back and forth. We book a quantity and we fund the program at the target value, meaning you have to perform at 100% perfect performance to do this for $1. And we know it's going to cost $1.60 or whatever it may be. So then we get into a cycle of having cost overruns when we didn't really budget to what the cost was. So it's a combination to your issue. Senior leadership wants to see performance. Done with excuses. How are we going to get there? The last one on that is on strategy. And four of the programs that you probably are tracking with challenges, they're all first of class with fixed price contracts. On the 93 ships I mentioned, 91 are fixed price contracts. It's pretty challenging for somebody to build an actual first of class with a fixed price approach. So that's a strategy issue. We are working on a governance approach that affects the strategy to improve the procurement approach.
Okay, I'm going to take one from online question here. It's from Mike Hogan of the Atlantic Council. With the current focus on surging capacity in the commercial shipbuilding industry, are you concerned that these ventures may be competing for the same labor pool as naval shipbuilding and that these efforts could adversely affect our ability to build warships? I'm going to ask each of you to quickly respond to that. I'll start at the far end here. Marty.
Absolutely.
You're concerned with increasing the commercial shipbuilding because it's going to compete with naval shipbuilding?
The supply is finite. It's going to bid up the prices and compete for demand.
Okay, Tom, now put your former NAVSEA hat on,
Yep.
And on the flip side, your HII hat.
Yes, I agree 100%. I think right now it's a supply and demand issue. We don't have the capacity to build the ships that we need, the military ships we need. And if the government all of a sudden decides they want to get into the commercial shipbuilding and subsidize it heavily like it's done in Korea and Japan, I think that there will be some unintended consequences. So while I'm all for building more commercial ships in this country and for all the benefits that come with it, I think we have to be very careful that there's not an unintended consequence. So I think we have to watch this very, very carefully.
Yes, 2 quick points. Yes, absolutely will be if they're not already competing with each other because of the points made. We have gone to distributed shipbuilding in the last 4 or 5 years to build more units at smaller places, and that requires even more overhead related to those functions. So that's a bit of a concern. and that'll compete with commercial. And the other big area of concern is engineering. Many of these yards are not full-service yards, or these companies, and especially when you get into first of class. And that causes competition across the other parts of industry to try to provide that support infrastructure to those yards.
I'm going to take a contrary view and say I don't believe that that's the case. I think that the United States of America is a maritime nation, right? And maritime power has multiple dimensions, right? And commercial, maritime power is maritime power, which is national power. And so I think that approaches that say, it's true. Everything that my colleagues on the panel have said today is true. If we had to, move our workforce away from naval shipbuilding into commercial right now, that would obviously be robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? But the 2B situation that we have to strive for would be to, increase the pie, right? We're going to have to build a bigger maritime industrial base, and then it will eventually serve to distribute the overhead costs and a lot of these costs so that the Navy or the U.S. government is not bearing all of those costs. And then I'm going to be a complete heretic that, we're not in the top 10 shipbuilders in the world, right? The number one right now is China, but the number 2, 3, and they're our very close allies. And I think that we should take some creative approaches, particularly as we build our domestic capacity. We should loosen up on the Jones Act a little bit for perhaps a constrained period of time for constrained and defined purpose to help us get this thing jump-started with some of our allies who can churn out ships, on time, on budget, very capably.
I'm going to invoke my partner, Mike Petters, who his basic philosophy was, if it's good for shipbuilding, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
And there's likely some near-term pain in terms of starting up, really rekindling a commercial shipbuilding industry in this country. But in the long term, I think it's the best, as you described, for a maritime nation. Back to questions.
Yes, thank you. Mark Johnson, a former Naval Institute director. I know I'm coming at this at a bit of a different angle, but here goes. There was a famous French author who once said, "The future is not what it used to be." And I kind of get worried in terms of when you talk about hypersonics, you talk about autonomy, you talk about unmanned, just how fast things are moving with AI. And I just wonder, do we know what the architecture, the big architecture of all these ships looks like?
I've been waiting for this question, and I'm going to turn to Admiral Richardson. Because if you read your February's proceedings, he laid the groundwork for an approach to ship design that I think it was right at the heart of your question.
And can I just say, both design, but also you talked about 4 to 9 years to build. I mean, how do we know, again, what, unmanned autonomy versus manned? What does it look like 10 years from now with how fast logarithmically things are sort of moving?
Mathematical on us now.
Oh, sorry. I was an aerospace engineer.
I'll dive into that. The article basically lays out sort of a design to doing that, and it's not 10 years from now, it's today, actually, right? And so it sort of says that we don't have, right now, our acquisition system is, I think, fundamentally tuned or resonates at a frequency of delivering a platform, right? With the structure and everything else. And that was put in place, that's McNamara's system, right? With some tweaks on it. And we've got, a Mr. Potato Head OTA, and we've got a Mr. Potato Head DIU, and we put these things on. But the fundamental system hasn't really changed that much. It's very, very highly centralized. It's over-dependent on centralized analysis, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what we have to, what I hypothesized or put forward was an acquisition system that really sort of understands that things are built in sort of three streams, three acquisition streams. One is what we have, structures, right? And I'm not saying, platforms are a thing of the past. I think that we need platforms. We need ships, we need aircraft, we need combat vehicles. We need those platforms. And they're going to be produced at their rate, which is the slowest rate, right? And they're going to last the entire life of that platform. So let's use a ship. We are at the Naval Institute, so it's not bad. So that's going to last, let's say, 40 years, right? The hull of that ship is going to last 40 years. We got to put some real thought into it, including its propulsion plant, power system, et cetera. But the real warfighting capacity, a lot of it, comes from the systems that we were going to put on that ship. That's another acquisition stream altogether, and it proceeds at a completely different pace. And it's relatively independent of the structure stream. So whereas that structure stream, let's say it's one a decade, that's generous. The system one is one every 3 to 5 years, okay? And then on top of that, now we have software, which is as fast as you can code it and test it and deploy it, right? So now we say, okay, what does that ship project look like? Well, it looks like putting together a project team with experts from each one of those streams, and it really becomes now an integration effort, right? We take the best of breed of each one of those streams, design it down into that particular ship, right? Whether it's a frigate and that's kind of how we started the frigate, right? That was sort of the underlying philosophy for the Constellation class design, but we've lost our way on that, right? So, kind of to get at your point, that allows. Another way to think about it, we talk about things like Moore's Law, where power doubles every 2 years, let's say, every 5 years, depending upon what part of that thing we're talking about. Another way to think about that, though, is in terms of half-lives, since you mentioned logarithms, and so if I put out the bleeding edge technology right now in microprocessors, right? And that thing is issued on day one. If it takes me 4 years to get through the contracting and design and testing and all of that, that's 2 half-lives. So I am actually issuing something that is 25% of the original combat power that I, pitched it when it was done. We've got to get better through all of those things, capture and harness the speed of each one of those acquisition streams, software, systems, and structures.
Thank you.
Read the article for more in-depth. I think there's something there, and I think that we need to be talking about future ship programs that need to adopt it today. So for the last question, it's going to go to our ad hoc panel member, Lieutenant Kim. So you
No.
Here we go.
Lieutenant Kim.
This question goes to Admiral Richardson now.
I thought you were going to answer the question.
Oh, sorry.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. All right.
So,
my enthusiasm just went down quite a bit.
I did want to address the productivity, which says if you run a business, as I'm in business school right now, you get 1.5 quarters of bad performance until you get canned. I feel like business is actually more brutal to survive than actually the Navy.
Could you restate that? I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
It's more brutal to survive in business than to survive in the Navy, it almost seems like.
2 quarters if you don't do the...
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it, yeah.
And then, in speaking to the wages, and yes, we do need to bring the wages up, but the productivity of a welder now is not much or no better than it was 100 years ago. It's still a guy with a TIG welder making beads, and maybe they'll get X linear foot of welds per year. The things I don't think or that in pipe fitting or that in any kind of manufacturing, I don't think we've made any jumps in that in the last, I'd say, 100 years, ever. And I almost feel like we can't justify a higher wage to our shipbuilders unless we could get that jump. Or what's, I guess...
Yeah, no, I was making the point because we have to be focused. I think that the customer would be happy to pay a little bit higher wage if he could get the output metric to follow that investment, right? And so, to kind of the point that's been made on the panel, in many parts of business, you're not going to get a multiple like you're going to get in IT, right? I mean, that's just crazy multiples. Look at some of them that have been like 40, multiples of 40, et cetera. That's never going to happen for shipbuilding. But I think the point's been made that we've got to, I think as the customer, stop trying to grind the profit down to under 5%. Otherwise we've got some kind of an outrage, and just focus on value. Right? And so let's not worry about what their margins are. Let's get into what the value is. And to your point about the welders, that if you do a theory constraints type of analysis, hey, right now it's people, right? So there's lots of ways to get around this thing. Those shipbuilders that are in the top 5, they're using a ton of automation, just like you said. And so you've got people monitoring, not just one, but a host of machines, just making sure they're all doing what they need to do. And, that's another way to, I think, get that wage to give you a lot more productivity.
Agree. That's definitely, I think that's the one thing that that's the paper I'm writing right now is about the labor portion. And
all right.
You get a footnote.
Just make sure you footnote.
I'll footnote you, sir. I'll send you a draft. I'll send you a draft when I'm done. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank Secretary Stackley and this distinguished panel. It's no surprise that we went long. Fascinating discussion. I think we could have gone another hour easily. So I'm going to invite you back, and I promise I'll pay you double next time what I paid you this time, if you'll promise to come back. But anyway, as a small token of our appreciation, our panelists will receive the book. We just talked about Brent Sadler. So by Brent Sadler, U.S. Naval Power in the 21st Century. So thank you again to our panelists. Great job. How about another round of applause for them? Thank you again to L3 Harris and Admiral Clunder for being here. Thanks to all our members and all our supporters and all of you here. Thanks for being here today. As we reflect on the year behind us and look to the future, we return to why the Naval Institute matters. In an era of renewed competition for global influence, advancing the understanding of sea power and the critical issues shaping national security and global security is not just important, it is urgent. As we embark on the next chapter, I invite you to stay engaged, continue your great support of the Institute, exercise your right as a member to vote in new board members, and finally, as always, if you're not a member, please join. If you are a member, please redouble your efforts and go find somebody who's not and get them to be a member. We appreciate all the help with recruiting. Thank you again for your attention. Thank you to all our speakers, panelists, and congrats again to all our award winners. And now that concludes the meeting, and I'd love to have you join us up on the topside terrace for a reception. Thank you so much.